Biggest obstacle for the Texans in round one of the draft. We need to keep a really, really close eye on this because could potentially be a problem for Nick Caserio and company. Plus, how all the big names are impacting the Texans. Go inside the locker room. We're 2+ weeks away from the draft, baby.
Yeah.
We'll do it live.
Yeah. It's the locker room on YouTube. You know what it is. Let's get it. Ayy. Locker room, yeah, we in the locker room. Texas talk, yeah, you know what we about to do. Localized, every angle's what we really do. We the source, we the pulse of the city too. Landlocked, got the game in the headlock.
All right, we're 2+ weeks away from the draft. It is the locker room, number one source for Texans digital content. We just watched the national championship. Houston comes up short. Imagine that. The Houston Cougars come up short against Florida. This is the place where a lot of people would say, oh, congratulations. Nah, they should have won the whole thing. You can get a congratulations later. This isn't a congratulate. They should have won that thing. 4 turnovers, the last 4 possessions, 12-point lead. You beat the best team in the tournament, arguably, in the type of fashion you did. It almost feels wasted now. So we can get to it, but at the moment, I'm not in the mood to do the whole, oh, what a hell of a season. No, thank you. Not doing that. That was a horrific loss, quite frankly. And props to Kelvin Sampson for doing what he does. But man, as close as he's ever gotten, and they choked it away, and that sucks. So yeah, not ideal. Cebu says it was a home game for the Cougs. It was 50-50, brother. I mean, it was home by location. That's the other unfortunate thing for Houston is in the last round, they play Purdue, and it's about an 90-10 split. Tennessee had a significant crowd advantage. It was 50-50 today. I talked to people that were there. There was no, you couldn't tell which side the crowd was rooting for. The majority of the crowd. So yeah, that's another tough thing. But cool run and everything, but no congratulations. That one was tough, man. That one was tough. That was a missed opportunity. For sure. 2 weeks plus away from the draft. There's a lot of chatter around the NFL that might not seem like it impacts the Houston Texans, but I think some of it probably could, indirectly and directly. We'll localize that a little later on in the show. If you missed SNL, check out SNL, 4 o'clock every day. Myself and Cody Stutes. We'll be having a draft party 2-3 Saturdays from now. We want you to be there. We'll give you the details by the end of the week. But I want to start with a potential nightmare for the Texans. And at the very least, it's a potential obstacle that the Texans need to keep a close eye on as they select in round one of the NFL draft. And at 25, a lot of times you ask the question, well, is this guy going to fall to me? Is this guy going to fall? Is Ibuka going to fall? Is Calvin Banks going to fall? There's someone in the chat just asked about Omarion Hampton. You're basically crossing your fingers that someone, quote unquote, falls to you in the draft. And there's nothing more gut wrenching and nothing more of a punch in the junk than when you're hoping someone's going to fall in your lap and another team before you ends up taking that guy. We've seen it. Sometimes you've been disappointed by it, and it's ended up being fine. Andre Dillard, the Eagles hopped the Texans and got Andre Dillard. And quite frankly, Titus Howard was a better player than Andre Dillard. So you didn't feel like you really missed much there. So it ended up working out. There's other times where Breece Hall is an example. Breece Hall, we thought the Texans liked him in 2022. The Jets hop up over you, and they take Breece Hall. We've seen the examples in recent history, and both of those examples are in the last a half decade plus of the Texans getting hopped over and a team grabbing a player that perhaps they like. This year's really unique for the Texans, though, and I think this is something we need to be keeping an eye on when it comes to the Texans potentially getting someone or someone falling to them. And that's the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings are actually a big potential pain in the ass for the Texans. And there's a couple of reasons. Number one, if you and me and the people in the chat know what the Texans need, and let's be honest, most of the draft experts, quote unquote, they know what the Texans need and they have a good idea, then it goes without saying that a lot of teams know the same thing as well. They know the Texans wide receiver and offensive line is where a lot of the dialogue is when it comes to the Texans. And maybe there's outside chances at positions like running back and D-line. But for the most part, you have a pretty good idea of what the Texans need. Right before the Texans pick, the Minnesota Vikings are drafting 24th overall. And the Minnesota Vikings, especially in the first round, they are one of those teams that not only could, but they most likely will be a team that's trying to move back in the draft. And I'll just show you this just to give you kind of an idea why. This is the Minnesota Vikings website, and these are the draft picks that Minnesota has in this draft. They have the 24th overall selection, and then they have the 97th, which was a comp pick, and they have the 139th and the 187th. So they have a 5th, 6th, 1st, and then they have a 3rd round comp pick in this draft. And you would think that a team like the Minnesota Vikings would like to add some picks. And you would think that teams that maybe like a wide receiver or an offensive lineman or a running back or something, even if they're not trying to leap the Texans, if they're trying to leap some of the other teams drafting behind the Texans, you got to think that they're going to call Minnesota and perhaps make a trade with them. Like if Jackson Dart, let's say that a team is in love with the quarterback, and let's say Jackson Dart falls to 24. You never know what's going to happen with quarterbacks. But let's say that he's there. You could easily see a scenario where a team hops the Texans. Like even a good team, like a Baltimore or Kansas City, who maybe doesn't need as many picks. They know that Minnesota needs picks. So they might be willing to go up there and leap the Texans to take somebody. Or there could be a team that really, really needs something that the Texans need, and they know it's potentially going to happen. This is actually, I would make a case, one of the worst places to be picking if you're the Texans. And a lot of times teams kind of scout out these situations. The example I always use is when the Dallas Cowboys ended up with Micah Parsons, they actually wanted to take corners, but the 3 corners went off the board. So then it was between Philadelphia and the Giants. Who do you trade with? Because both of those teams wanted to hop over the team behind the Cowboys that wanted a wide receiver. And they wanted Devontae Smith. The Cowboys decided to go with the Eagles. The Eagles hop up, and the Eagles take Devontae Smith before the team that was going to select him. So drafting behind Minnesota is not an ideal situation for the Texans. Is it an extreme nightmare? Probably not. But it seems like a likely possibility that the Minnesota Vikings will be willing to trade back. Because no GM wants 4 picks in a draft. It's not like the Minnesota Vikings are the Chiefs, the Ravens, the Eagles. They're basically they're starting over with a new quarterback this year. So the Minnesota Vikings are going to be looking to trade back. It's only a matter of who's going to trade with them. Is it going to be a team that trades up for a quarterback? Is it going to be a team that decides that they want to, let's say Ibuka's on the board, they want Ibuka, so they trade up for Ibuka? The possibilities are endless. So I would keep a close eye on that. Very close eye on that. Which brings me to some of the national noise and how this could be connected to this scenario here in the locker room, number one source for Texans digital content. Now, there's been talk that the Raiders, they are getting a lot of pressure from their fan base, and Genty is becoming the most popular selection that Raiders Nation wants the Raiders to make. They want them to select Genty, and we know that the Raiders like to make splashes. We know they got Geno Smith. They probably need to help him accordingly. And the other thing we know that there's not a lot of good wide receivers in this draft. The wide receiver talent is not great. We've talked about that from a Texans point of view. The wide receiver talent, not good at all. So could the Raiders be a team that decides, okay, we're going to take Genty. There's not really a wide receiver we like. We have Geno Smith. We need to do Geno Smith some favors. So we're going to take Genty. Now, how does that impact the Texans? Because you knew Genty was not going to be there when you selected. Here's the possibility and how I'll connect it to what we started this thing off. And appreciate everyone for coming through. Shout out to everyone that watched that Cougs L to the Gators. That was a toughie. Not going to lie. That was a tough. Can't even get a shot off at the end. That's tough. But if Genty goes to the Raiders, let's pretend that Genty goes to the Raiders. Okay? So they're out of the running back in the second round, which you would think is a good thing because you don't want teams in front of you. If the Texans are going to take a running back in the second round, you don't want teams in front of you to be taking running backs. And you want as many running backs as possible remaining in the second round. Let's just pretend, and I witnessed this myself, let's just pretend that there is mutual respect, admiration from Ohio State players and Chip Kelly. Let's pretend that the Raiders, they make that splash. They're feeling themselves. They got the new ownership. They're trying to help Geno Smith. They probably, in a perfect world, would have liked to take a receiver there, but they don't think that where they were selecting in the first round, which was number 6 overall, they don't think that is something that warrants taking one of these receivers, whether it's McMillan, whether it's Golden. They don't think that was necessary. Okay? So then let's pretend, and these are logical lines to connect. Let's pretend that Ibuka's falling, and the scenario we just talked about where Minnesota has 4 picks and they're right in front of the Texans. They damn sure don't need receivers. That's the other thing about Minnesota is if a wide receiver is there, Minnesota's not taking a wide receiver. They got Addison and they got Jefferson. Now, crazier things have happened. I would assume that Minnesota's not doing that. They want draft picks. So let's say that the Raiders, who in the second round, the Raiders right there at 37, let's say that the Raiders decide, hey, Chip, what do you think of Ibuka? And Chip Kelly says, well, I like him a lot. He's awesome. You know, he's one of the leaders of the team. We won a national championship. I've heard Ibuka say good things about him. What if the Raiders trade with the Vikings 12 spots and they go up and they snatch Ibuka at 24? And then the Vikings are trading back 12 spots. They're probably going to get a lot of draft equity. They're probably going to have, by the time that's done, maybe a full draft allotment, 6-7 picks, obviously not the first rounder. And then the Raiders hop you. So that could be the impact of Genty going to the Raiders. Then there's the Travis Hunter scenario, which this is not as bad, but while Genty is now the betting favorite for the Raiders, Travis Hunter is the betting favorite for the Browns. I don't know what the hell's happened. The guy that I follow in Cleveland that I think is the go-to guy, he said that he likes Travis Hunter the possibility, and he does think it's a possibility. Now, the interesting thing is the Browns need offense. I heard Nathan Zagura saying that the defense is good, but this is going to be an offensive draft. They got problems on offense. So if they take Travis Hunter, the guy that I follow out there, Zach Jackson, he said he could see a scenario where they pull almost like a Texans and they decide to trade up for Shedeur Sanders if he slides. Now, I don't know when the Shedeur Sanders slide would happen. I know that there's a popular kind of movement, which you always take. You take all this shit with a grain of salt, by the way. All this draft talk, this stuff. We're trying to make sense. We're just giving warning signs. The Minnesota thing's real, though. The Minnesota trade back is as real as it gets. When a team has that few of draft picks, they're not necessarily a young team. They're kind of a balance between a rebuild and a win-now team. And we haven't seen what their quarterback looks like. The Minnesota trade back is real. It is 100% real. So with all these scenarios and these what ifs, that is a stable thing to look at. So Minnesota at 24 is something you want to keep an eye on. Now, he says that he could see a situation where they trade for Shedeur Sanders if he slides with Travis Hunter. Okay. That wouldn't be the worst thing for the Texans, assuming that there's a slide to 24. And maybe they like Jackson Dart too. Because in that scenario, I would say that Minnesota, again, would be ideal for a team to trade up and perhaps take a quarterback. And that's probably a dream scenario. Like the dream scenario for Texans fans and the dream scenario for Nick Caserio and the dream scenario for DeMeco is 3 quarterbacks go before 25. It doesn't matter when, where, how, why. 3 quarterbacks going before 25 is a dream. You have 0 chance at drafting a quarterback. 0 chance you draft a quarterback. I think there's probably 3 positions that you can 100%, no exceptions, eliminate the Texans from taking in round 1. I would say we're not doing punter kicker. We'll put those to the side. But I would say quarterback, safety, and probably center. Quarterback, safety, center. Like you can 100%, no scenario, do the Texans take any of those 3 positions in the first round. Outside of that, all bets are off. But they're not taking a quarterback. And you might want to put Eamon Warry on the list too. There was kind of hope. There was kind of not hope, but there was talk like before they traded for Gardner Johnson that maybe Eamon Warry falling would be something DeMeco would consider. That's not happening now. But those are the 3 positions you can eliminate there. Then there's the other thing that I wonder, and this is more like a popcorn type of situation. This is more of a get your popcorn ready, enjoy the show, see what happens. And there's a lot of possibilities with how this can go. And this is connected to the Texans because some people don't want this guy in the division. But the Tyler Warren thing is something to really keep an eye on. Tyler Warren, localizing the Tyler Warren thing. When the hell is this guy going to go? Because it's quite possible stranger things have happened than Jacksonville taking him number 5 overall. They just lost Trevor Lawrence's, one of his top targets in Ingram. They have one of the best young wide receivers in the league in Brian Thomas. So they're probably not too desperate. Now, we've also heard that they could go D-line, although they did today pick up the 5th-year option on not Aiden Hutchinson. That's what I call him. I call Trevon Walker not Aiden Hutchinson. NAH. Nah. That's what he is. He is NAH, not Aiden Hutchinson. Nah. From now on, that's what Trevon Walker will be known as here. If they would have taken Aiden Hutchinson, it probably would have been a problem for the Texans. You probably don't win the division 2 years ago, quite frankly. I think you probably win an extra game. But they just picked up the extension of nah. So they could go offense. Cody Stutes on SNL threw out a interesting scenario as we pull this back up. where New England at number 4, they decide they're going to take Tyler Warren. Now, they signed Stephon Diggs to essentially a 1-year deal late in the free agency, the first free agency process. Now, why did they do that? Did they do that because they knew they weren't going to take a receiver? Because if you like Ted McMillan and you think he's that dude, I mean, maybe you still take Diggs. Maybe they could draft both of them. But let's be honest, like, few people think that Ted McMillan's like a Marvin Harrison Jr. or someone that you take that early. He's not Jamar Chase. So could New England decide that they want Tyler Warren at number 4? You have the Brock Bowers effect, where Bowers had a record-setting year last year. A lot of people were talking positional value. I think that's kind of been put to the side. Could that happen? Could it happen with the Jags at 5? I think we can dismiss the Raiders. I don't think they're going to run a revolutionary 2 tight end set. The Jets have said they're going to run the ball a lot. They probably need offensive line, but I wouldn't completely dismiss that. And then you have a bunch of teams here that maybe you keep an eye on with that. But this is the team right here, Indianapolis, that really, 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 really wants Tyler Warren badly. One of the worst kept secrets in the league. Their entire fan base wants Tyler Warren. So when does Tyler Warren go? Does the thought of Tyler Warren in the division scare you? Because I'll tell you the truth. I would rather Tyler Warren go to Indianapolis than I would Jacksonville. And I know Jacksonville's been an easy-ass target this offseason. They got the goofy-ass coach saying goofy-ass things. They've had 2 crappy seasons after kind of being put up in that second tier in the AFC. Trevor Lawrence is already on his 3rd coach. But they got Brian Thomas Jr., they got Trevor Lawrence coming back. And they got a decent defense, the talent's there. So if you don't want Tyler Warren in the division, I think Jacksonville would be a little bit more of a nightmare. If you just think he's that dude. That's a if. Like if you don't think he's that good and he doesn't really scare you, then that doesn't matter. That you don't care either way. But Jacksonville would be wild. There's also been some momentum with another tight end, Colston Loveland out of Michigan. We were talking about Loveland early in the process and asking the question, is Colston Loveland, could he be someone that the Texans consider at 25? If he's there at 25, at this point, I would be relatively shocked. Because the Brock Bowers talk, it works for Colston Loveland as well. And if Tyler Warren isn't there at 14, Indianapolis has been obsessing over tight end play. Does Indianapolis decide to draft him? Then you have other teams that could be interested in him as well. As you go down here, his old coach, Jim Harbaugh, with the Chargers, they could probably use the tight end. And then a few more of these other squads around here. So Colston Loveland went from could he be there to wouldn't count on it. Which isn't the greatest thing, because I think a lot of people would like to have Loveland. And I know Nick Caley likes tight ends. But I don't know that the Texans are really, really dying to get tight ends. The reality of this is, in multiple ways, it's kind of a double-edged sword for the Texans when it comes to the lack of wide receiver talent in this draft, because you need a wide receiver at 25 in the last how many ever drafts. You're probably feeling like you're going to get a quality wide receiver. In this one, you're not feeling awesome. You can probably get a quality wide receiver later on in the draft, but like guy that warrants being selected at 25, you don't feel great about it. And then when you start focusing on other positions and you start throwing out other possibilities, suddenly it's more difficult to get those guys. So the Texans aren't inventing critical thinking. They're not inventing rational thinking. So these other teams that maybe could use a wide receiver, and I don't think teams can get enough of them, maybe they're thinking about tight ends. Maybe they're thinking about running backs. Maybe they're thinking about offensive linemen. So that's kind of the unfortunate double-edged sword at wide receiver for the Texans. Now, there's going to be some gems. Maybe they find the gems. It's hard to imagine more than 4 wide receivers being selected in the first round. And quite frankly, I think if Las Vegas were setting a handicap for it, I think they'd probably put it at 3.5. And I think most of the money would be on the under the 3.5. Never know. Surprises happen in the draft. That's the beauty of it. But that's the double-edged sword of where these wide receivers and this lack of wide receiver talent is. Matthew Golden, by the way, invited to the draft. So we've seen guys sit in the war room and watch and all that. It feels like they think he's going first. And he's really been the only wide receiver. I said this the other day on X. And I said this with Stutz. He's the only wide receiver, I would say, that there haven't really been a lot of questions. I mean, there's questions, but from what his stock was at the end of the season to what it is currently, it feels like his stock has only risen. I think there's questions about McMillan, and these might be questions that don't mean a damn thing. He might end up getting selected earlier, but there's questions about McMillan. There's been questions about Ibuka. There's a lot of questions about Luther Burden. You got to think if he'd been out 2 years ago, you would be talking about him probably on the back end of probably a second round guy. And his stock really hasn't jumped up, even after that good year a few years ago. But he's another guy. A lot of people want offensive linemen. Who makes sense there? Who's falling at O-line? And what does that tell you as well if you take an offensive lineman? On the interior, I think your interior guys are going to be there. You might have a crack, like assuming that you evaluate it right, you might have a crack at the best interior offensive lineman guard in the draft, depending on who they like. I think Booker is a guy they're going to love talking to. They're going to love hearing stuff about him. I almost wonder if he would be there in the second round. Who knows, though? But as far as like right kind of guy and all that, he kind of sounds a lot like I think DeMeco wants his football players to sound. Booker. The other thing is, does that kind of hold more weight? Like if we're talking offensive line, and we've gone through the wide receivers, the nightmares and stuff, but let's just talk about the offensive line. Let's pretend that they're going to go on the interior. Let's pretend that Booker is a possibility out of Alabama. And I'm telling you, when it comes to the culture stuff, the right kind of guy, all that, he sounds the part. And he comes from Alabama, where DeMeco Ryans has shown that he likes guys from Alabama. And it's not Nick Saban's Alabama, but I'm assuming he still has respect for what they do there. Does the way that a guy sounds and sounding like the right culture guy on the offensive line, does that hold more stock now? Because we've heard about a revamped offensive line. We've heard about one voice. Some people have used the word, a culture shift on the offensive line, which I think is a thing, whether it's something that they proactively or intentionally tried to do. Like once Laramie Tunsil leaves, it's a different culture. You're alpha male on the offensive line, and a guy who admittedly kind of moves his own kind of way, he's gone. So naturally, your offensive line, your culture is going to change. Now, what does DeMeco want that culture to sound like? What does he want it to look like? He said competition. He said one voice. He said all that. Does he want it to sound like? Because this is the other thing. We asked Derek Stingley. Someone asked Derek Stingley. I don't remember who. It was in the media scrum. They asked him, who embodies Swarm the most? when it comes to what DeMeco Ryans wants and what he says all the time when he talks about the Swarm. DeMeco was actually asked the question too, and he had the same answer. The answer was Will Anderson. That was who Stingley said, and that was who DeMeco said. So that's a guy who they traded up for. They traded a lot of draft equity. It was probably between him and CJ at 2, and they decided to get both, and it's paid off. Now, if the offensive line has all these issues and you're trying to kind of recharge the offensive line, you're trying to revamp the offensive line, and the interior offensive line is as bad as we've seen in a long time, Booker and Will Anderson, they're pretty tight. They also have the same mindset, and the mindset when they speak, when they put brain to the message, it's the exact same. Very similar. Now, am I saying that Booker's as good of a player as Will Anderson? No, I'm not. We're talking about him potentially being there at 25, and quite frankly, I would bet on him being there at 25. Almost wonder if he goes to the second round. But I also wonder, with how much DeMeco talks about culture, with how much Will Anderson is the face of what they do right now, if the fact that there's an interior offensive lineman from the same school with the same mindset, with the same message that's going to be there, does that hold a massive amount of stock to where that's the pick? I don't think I would throw a party if they drafted Booker. There's a lot of reasons why. I don't know if he's a plug-and-play day one guard that is going to fit into what they do. I don't know what they do. That's the other thing. I don't know what this system looks like, so I don't know what they're asking him to do. None of us do. So I don't know that. Also, don't know if it's good value to take him there. And there's also the PTSD of the evaluation of premium resources on offensive linemen. I know it's a different O-line coach. I know it's a different OC. It's the same GM and it's the same coach. It's the same GM that took Kenyon Green. It's the same GM and coach that decided that Titus Howard needed to be one of the highest paid right tackles in the league. It's the same GM and coach that decided they needed to trade up for Juice Scruggs and can't really find a position for him. And quite frankly, he hasn't been great at either one. It's the same GM and coach that traded for Shaq Mason and then decided they wanted to give Shaq Mason an extension and then watch Shaq Mason, after a good year one, have a piss poor year two and decided to put him back in the starting lineup in a playoff game after they'd been functioning at a average-ish level without him. So there's that factor too. But I do think that factor, that's based on emotions. I think the factor based on actual actions and words, it leads you to think that they're going to like Booker in some way, shape, or form. How much is to be determined, but they're going to like what they hear from Booker. I promise you. There's a lot of guys that they're going to like what they hear. I think Ibuka's the same way. So if you're holding off hope for Ibuka's the same way. The only difference is I don't know if Ibuka's going to be at 25. I wouldn't bet on it. But I mean, predicting what's going to happen in the draft, we get this cabin fever. We talk about stuff like this. We talk about, hey, this is the nightmare situation with this in front of you. If this guy goes here, that guy goes here. But I would not bet on Ibuka being there at 25. I wouldn't be shocked. I would bet on Booker being there at 25. That's what matters as much. But Ibuka, same type of presence, same type of mindset. Probably a bigger need, depending on who you ask. Some people would say offensive line. Some people would say wide receiver. Don't know if Banks is going to be there. I think most people would rather have Banks. Banks can potentially be a tackle, and they're saying he can be a guard. I think he's a good tackle. The other factor that I think that we need to take into account is if they draft a tackle. So the guard is, you're just hoping he's a plug-and-play guy, and you're hoping they know what they're doing, and I don't think there's too much resistance there. There's not like a young guy in his way. I don't think Juice Scruggs is going to get in the way of a guard. Caserio has said he's a better center than guard. Okay, whatever. We'll see. I don't think either one's been fantastic at this point. Jared Patterson might end up being your swing O lineman. He's been fine for where he was drafted. But I don't think there's a lot of resistance, like long-term type of thoughts. Like the guards that you brought in, none of them are long-term answers. They're short-term answers, best case. And Booker, if he's good, you put him in there. He's your long-term guard. You hope. Let's say they draft a tackle. And you look at Cam Robinson. Cam Robinson got $15 million. You got to think they think he's going to start, right? Right? Like you would think so, right? So if they take a tackle, is he going to be competing with Blake Fisher? Because last year you drafted Blake Fisher, and I would assume that you had some sort of vision that he would be a starting tackle, right? I would think that was somewhat of a chess move. So what do we think about that? If you draft a guy and he's competing with Blake Fisher. And I think Blake Fisher needs to earn his spot. But ideally, you would like Blake Fisher to be a long-term answer at tackle. I mean, you drafted him in the second round with a lot of tackles on the board. It wasn't necessarily a critical need at the time. I mean, Titus Howard had just gotten that extension. Y'all were talking about how he was going to be a tackle. Laramie Tunsil was still here. And you drafted Blake Fisher. So would you think that these are your two starting tackles and Cam Robinson holds it down for a year? Is Cam Robinson competing to where maybe you have a $15-14 million swing tackle? I mean, there's just a lot of questions that emerge with the offensive line. And I know that the offensive line needs to be better and overhaul. And I think a lot of times it gets simplified when we talk about it, but I think there's a little bit more to it than saying the offensive line needs to get better. So you draft an offensive lineman. There's no guarantee. And I think Detroit's kind of the exception because Detroit they have a lot of first round guys, but it was over the course of a lot of years where they did that. But just because you invest in the offensive line doesn't mean the offensive line is going to be good. Texans have had top 3 investment when it comes to assets used to acquire and assets used to compensate offensive linemen, and it's been one of the worst offensive lines in the league. So I don't know that necessarily matters. TXX says if he gets drafted at 25, he will start. Okay. How do you know that? How do you know that? What is that? I mean, I don't know that. You know that. I don't. I do not know that at all. I think in a perfect world, he would. So you're telling me you're going to draft any of these tackles? Just name any of them. You're going to draft any of these guys and they're not competing with Blake Fisher? Okay. So Blake Fisher, you drafted in the second round last year when you had 2 tackles that were among the highest paid. And now all of a sudden he's a swing tackle? Make that make sense. That's kind of iffy for me. I mean, I thought this about Kenyon Green too, and this might go back to the PTSD factor. I thought this about Kenyon Green. But I can't guarantee who is and isn't going to start with who they draft. They're going to have competition. They're going to have a lot of competition. And we'll see what it looks like. We'll see what Blake Fisher looks like when he pulls up to camp this year. I think he's going to be a massive dude this year. That's the other thing. How do these guys look physically? But no, I don't think you draft an offensive lineman at 25 based on what we're talking about, and you just say he's 100% a starter. These guys struggle. I mean, even if you plug them in, a lot of times these guys struggle. You kind of need to save them from themselves. So I wouldn't. The offensive line thing is not safe. That's the whole point I'm trying to make. The offensive line thing is not safe. It's not. And that's unfortunate because when offensive linemen are discussed when they get drafted, typically it's like he's safe. Because I'll be honest, I don't try to like intensely break down offensive linemen round 1 through 7. I don't think most people do. We just think, okay, this is going to be safe. Kenyon Green's going to be plug and play. Blake Fisher's going to be your unquestioned starting tackle as soon as Titus or Laramie Tunsil doesn't work out. But yeah, you want your first round picks to be starters. But it's difficult. It's really difficult. And they've been really bad at this. They've been really bad at it. They've made changes, but they've been really bad at the offensive line. So that's kind of how all the big stuff kind of impacts the Texans. The nightmare scenario, Minnesota, and then the offensive line. A lot of questions emerge when it comes to the offensive line. Lots. I mean, it'll be, as soon as that happens, that's going to be what's going to happen on the stream with myself and Stutes. SNL. Mega stream. Well, where does this guy go? Where does that guy go? I don't know. Like, where did Kelvin Banks go? Do they think he's going to start out left guard and then they're going to bump him out to tackle? Is he going to, like, what do they do? Do they put him at left guard? I know he hasn't played left guard, but I think he said 22 of the teams that he met with asked him about it. Do they start him and then move him out? It's not too uncommon. It happens sometimes. What happens there? There's a lot of question marks that come with the offensive line. Wide receiver, does he even get to you? Are they going to go interior offensive line? Don't know. Running back's another thing. They're kind of in no man's land at running back. Because at running back, there's going to be a run in the second round. 59's late. 58's late. What are they going to do? And if someone falls to you at 25, there's usually a reason, especially if he's a tackle and especially if he's a receiver, especially in this receiver draft. I mean, I don't think other teams are stupid. I think a lot of times there's needs that push guys back, but those are two premium positions. Those are two of the highest paid positions. There's always going to be examples of good tackles and good wide receivers that kind of fall. And we look at guys, well, this guy was drafted in the 6th round. This guy was drafted in the 4th, and these guys went ahead of him. That's always going to happen every year. Exceptions and examples. Continue to say this. Exceptions and examples are the only draft absolute. But if a tackle falls to you and a wide receiver, I mean, it's a reason. This isn't like a guard or a linebacker, where typically at 25, there's a lot of times where you'll have your choice of no one at that position's gone. But wide receiver and tackle, if they fall to you for a reason a lot of times. Sometimes it works out for you, sometimes it doesn't. But there's some intriguing possibilities for the Texans. But I'm telling you, and I know how this works. Don't start counting down how many picks away someone is that you like that can end up on the to the Texans. Because that Minnesota 24 will just completely kick you in the nuts. Other teams know this stuff. They know what the Texans need, and they probably have a decent idea of what the Texans are going to pick. So that's something to really, really keep a close eye on, is that Minnesota 24th pick. They're not It's very, very unlikely that Minnesota, and they don't pick for damn near 70, 80 picks after they quote, make their first round pick. So they're going to be begging for teams to call them. Phone's going to be ringing off the hook. And they probably have guys like in the 25 to 40 range that they like a lot. They're in no man's land. 3 picks and then 1 comp. So just be real careful. Train yourself, train your eyes. Because it's a danger zone for sure. And there's nothing worse. I know a lot of times it ends up playing out in your favor. But when it happens, it sucks. You wait all that time, hours later, oh, he's not going to go. Oh, yes, he didn't go. Oh, he's not going to go. Yes, he didn't go. And then all of a sudden, boom, he's gone. It can happen quickly. So keep an eye on the Vikings. That is 100% the thing to keep an eye on is what in the hell are the Minnesota Vikings going to do at 24? Because I know O'Connell's kind of connected to the Rams. They used to say F them picks. Minnesota needs picks. You aren't winning Super Bowls. You just got rid of your quarterback. They need picks. So keep an eye on that. There's a lot of speculating going on this time of the year. I love every bit of it. A lot of it is a big what if. I don't think this Minnesota at 24 is a what if. This is something to really keep an eye on. And it might change the way you look at the draft. Maybe that means the Texans will be more willing to trade up inside of the top 20 because they want to get away from that threat of the Minnesota thing. Maybe they want to get up there and make it to where they can get a wide receiver. Maybe they want to get in the running back game. Maybe Colson Loveland's there and they decide, hey, we like him more than we like any of these wide receivers, but he's not getting past Harbaugh. Maybe there's some chess they're going to play. But I can promise you, Nick Caserio and DeMeco Ryans are very aware of Minnesota's situation, and if they're not, they damn sure better be. That is a nightmarish possibility. Appreciate everyone for coming through. Sorry about the Cougs loss. I think I started out saying I'm not going to say congratulations to Houston on a good season because they just choked away the championship. They had a good season. So it only took about 47 minutes. So they had a good season. But man, what a waste that Duke thing looks like now. Subscribe, like, ride along. Always remember, when it comes to this Texan stuff, we're all in it together. What should the Texans do about this Minnesota thing? Should they trade up? Should they stay put? Should they make the safe pick? What should they do? Let me know in the comments. And always remember, when it comes to this Texan stuff, we're all in it together. Appreciate y'all for coming through.
Game in the headlock, localized every time. Can't stop, won't stop. Yeah, we top 2 and we not 2. Plugged in daily digital on YouTube. We got taste for days. Opinions to give, we got takeaways. If it's up, then it's up. We number 1. You don't need to try your luck.